Hi there. Welcome to the Sober Circle channel. Enjoy this speaker tape.
Yeah. Joe scratched his name out. He said, that got rid of that, huh? It is my happy privilege tonight to introduce to you our speaker of the evening. I met him this morning for the first time. We enjoyed breakfast together at Joe's expense. And visited a few moments. I asked him if he'd, on his various speaking engagements, if he had any particular thing he'd like for me to tell you about him, and he said the least you can, the better. He didn't want me getting up here telling all the good things, because after he got through telling his story, he said I might make a liar out of me. But I did hear enough to know that you're in for a real treat and a wonderful AA evening. It is my distinct privilege to introduce to you Bryant B. from Dobson, North Carolina. Bryant?
Thank you very much. My name is Bryant Bivins, and I'm an alcoholic. By the grace of God, and because this program of Alcoholics Anonymous works in my life, I'm here today. And for that, I'm grateful. And when I say I'm grateful for my sobriety, I speak for a lot of people. The people in my community that know me and the law enforcement officers in our community, they are grateful for my sobriety, too. I want to thank the committee for having me here, I think. I will after it's over with, properly. But I don't think I'm going to put a judge up here with me. That sort of gives me an uneasy feeling. Still, haven't grown that much yet. But that is a first. I've spoken at a lot of these things, and the governor was supposed to be there, and the lieutenant governor or the mayor, and they've always sent somebody to take their place. And so there is one, because he was here tonight. I don't know anywhere to start except from the beginning. So that's what I'm going to do. Now, if I'd talked to you a few years ago, I could have told you all about alcoholism. I went into the diagnostic bit for a long, long time, and I could tell you why I was an alcoholic and what an alcoholic. But you know, tonight it doesn't particularly bother me at all why I was an alcoholic. I am one, and the thing that bothers me is that there's something else about this program of Alcoholics Anonymous that I need to learn about, and that's why I'm here, is to learn something this weekend. I doubt if I'll learn anything while I'm talking tonight, but I'm looking forward to learning something else. I've already talked to a lot of people here tonight since I've been here the last day. And these people have mentioned to me a legend in my AA years, and that was a fellow from the nearby state of Texas. His name was Burton. And Burton meant an awful lot to me in my sobriety. And I appreciate the old-timers who are here that have brought back some memories, because he was a tremendous factor in my sobriety, and I appreciate it. We have a lot in common tonight. We can't drink alcohol. The book of Alcoholics Anonymous tells us that we are ordinarily people who wouldn't mix. And I don't guess we would, that long, but we've all come from the bottom. We've come from our bottom. Our bottoms are different locations. And however sick we got, what you might classify as sick, it probably wouldn't faze me. But I got as sick as I want to get. I got as sick as I could, and that's about as sick as you can get. Now, if there's a high-bottom drunk here that got to Alcoholics Anonymous, God bless you. You're in the right place, because if you can't drink liquor, you're in the right place. Because that's what this is all about. People that can't drink liquor and want to change their life. But I ain't going to tell you too much about my story. One reason is I don't remember a lot of it. I've drunk most of the time, and I don't like to tell something that I don't know about. Besides, there's nothing fantastic about my story anyhow. But there's something miraculous about my recovery, and that's what I'm planning to talk more about than anything else if I get there. But I'm just like you. I didn't want to be an alcoholic. I didn't plan to be that, and I don't know of anybody else that said, I want to be an alcoholic, I'm going to drink to that. I didn't want to be an alcoholic. I wanted to be anything but an alcoholic. Because my daddy was an alcoholic. And I despised what it did for him. I despised what it did for him. I despised the life that we led. And I created early in my life some of the things that we talk about in our closed discussion meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous. We talk about fears, and we talk about resentments, and we talk about frustrations, and we talk about hate, and we talk about dishonesty. These things I created or were present in my life prior to ever taking a drink of alcohol. I lived in the home of a practicing alcoholic, and we never knew when he was coming home, if he was coming home, who he was coming home with, or what kind of condition he'd be in when he got there. We didn't know. So we lived in anxiety. There were some fears early in my life, and these fears continued to grow. And soon I was obsessed by fear. There were some frustrations early in my life. My daddy was a tobacco man. He was a very capable man of making a lot of money, but I told you that he was an alcoholic, so he was equally as capable of spending it, or more so. And this led to a lot of frustrations in my life. I couldn't understand why I had to ride a rusty bike down the street when the other kids had new ones. I didn't understand why we came up short from time to time when my daddy made as much money or more as anybody else's daddy did. I didn't understand this, and it was very frustrating to a young man. And these frustrations eventually led to resentments on my part. And the resentments eventually led to hate. And I had something else going for me, too, in becoming an alcoholic. I was the biggest liar that ever lived. I'm not talking about when I started drinking. I'm talking about when I was this tall. I'd tell a lie to make me look better or you look worse. I'd do that. And after I started drinking, I got a lot better at it. When you practice anything, you get a lot better at it. And I practiced enough, and I became an expert at it. But I had all of these things going for me, and I knew, and I can identify with some Alateens, too, because I knew that everybody was looking down on me. I knew that I didn't belong with a certain group of people, and I didn't fit. I didn't fit with this group because they were the elite group. I didn't fit with this group because that was the poverty group. I didn't fit with the middle income group because that was my income group. I didn't fit anywhere, although I wanted to fit and I tried to fit, and when I got to one group, I wished I were back in the other, or I wished I was with another group, and I never was completely satisfied. So I felt like I didn't fit anywhere, and I withdrew. I withdrew from people. And I didn't have a very good time, because when you are apart from people, you don't have a very good time. And I didn't. And I almost missed that first drink of alcohol that I took, because I told myself, some boys in our neighborhood had a party, and I told myself, I said, you're not going to have a good time, there's no need to go. And I started not to go, but I went. And when they passed around the jug, it was wine. It was blackberry wine, homemade blackberry wine, and I took a glassful. And when I took that second glassful, something happened to me. Something happened to me. I fitted. For the first time in my life, I fitted. It went all over me. I just don't know how. It affected every part of my body. It was about like swallowing an umbrella and having it open up on the inside of you. I wasn't bashful anymore. I wasn't backward anymore. Everything seemed to be working all right for me, including my mouth. And some of the people back home said, yeah, and it hadn't stopped yet. But I knew that I'd found an answer to my problem. I knew that I belonged to the... I felt like it's the first time in my life that I belonged somewhere. And I said, right then I started my alcoholic thinking, if it didn't start before that, because I said, if 2 big drinks of that alcohol will make me feel this good, then 4 will make me feel twice as good. And I wanted to see what twice as good as heaven felt like anyhow. So somewhere between 2 and 4, I got into a lot of trouble. Because I never did find that feeling again as long as I lived. I got drunk that night, and the next morning I was sick, terribly sick. But that didn't seem to bother me too much because I knew that I'd found out. I knew that I'd found that magic elixir, and I knew that there was a way. This was a great obsession of mine until I came back to Alcoholics Anonymous, that somehow, some way, I could drink like ordinary people. This was what I wanted to do. I had to learn how to drink. You know, people despise you when you just drink all you can and then fall out, and that's the way I did. I'd pass out in your living room, never seen you before in your life, or in your car. I had to learn how to walk straight, and I had to learn how to talk and not slur my words, and I had to learn how to act like a gentleman. And, you know, this takes some doing. This takes some doing when you want that liquor. Get on down there and get it and do the job, but you know you got to keep yourself straight. And about the time I learned how to master this, learn how to walk straight and talk straight and act like a gentleman, I started having the morning drink. And I never did enjoy social drinking as such. I never did enjoy it. I did not know how to stand around and wave a glass for about an hour. I never did learn how, and ain't too interested in learning about it now. But I never did learn how to do that. My social drinking went about like this. Somebody said, I think I'll have a drink, and I say, so shall I. That was as social as I ever got. My mother wanted me to go to Duke University. That was an obsession with her. But I'd already found alcohol, and I was smarter than anybody at Duke. They couldn't learn me anything, so there was no need to go to Duke University. I thought that I was about the smartest thing that ever lived. Get a few drinks, and there's nothing you could tell me. Not one thing that you could tell me. And I had a lot of talks with myself, being as smart as I was. I was having problems early in my drinking. My friends would say, I've got a little too much to drink. I think I'll go home. Not me. I'd go to town. And that's a bad place to go when you've had too much to drink. So I started getting in trouble a little early in my life. I started having trouble. And so I had to talk with myself, and I said, Self, you got to do something here. You know, you're getting in trouble. You're not drinking like these other people. You've got to do something. So Self and I came up with an idea that if I drank only beer, you know, that this would be all right. And beer worked out all right for 2 days or so, and then it'd get back into the hard stuff. It always worked out like that. But this was one of my points. And I continued to have problems. And I had another talk with myself, and I said, Self, you got to do something. You said you were going to stick to beer, and you didn't do it. I know what's wrong with you. You don't have any responsibilities. You're just a work playboy is all you are. And if you assume some responsibilities, if you become a husband and a father, that's what you need to do. You'd have more time to devote to your family and less time to drink, and that balance the scales off, and you live a well-rounded life forever, you know. So I accepted some responsibilities in my life, and, you know, that didn't work. That's the first time when I started out on this venture, this is the first time that I had the finger put on me about my drinking. Our family doctor, I went down and told him what I was going to do, and I needed a blood test to get married, and he said, come on in and have a seat. I'll be with you in a minute. So he comes in and he starts telling me about alcoholism and about a farm for alcoholics that he has out on the edge of town. And I said, what's wrong with him? And then I figured out what was wrong. He was getting a little old. He was senile. And I would hear him out. Finally, he got around to telling me what he wanted to tell me. He said, I have observed your drinking habits and patterns over the past few months. And he said, I'm of the opinion that you are already an alcoholic in the early stages. You're certainly a problem drinker, as much trouble as you get into. You've got a lot of years ahead of you. And if you leave this booze alone, you can expect something good. But if you continue on, I can't promise you much. So being of resentful nature, I resented this. And I told him if he'd kindly give me what I came in there for, I'd be on my way. And if I ever needed him, I'd call him. Real smart like. And I did. I called him about 6 months after I was married. I did real good for the first 2 or 3 weeks. I didn't drink anything but beer again. Awful lot of it, but I didn't drink anything but beer. But drinking beer to an alcoholic is like drinking a Coke when you're real thirsty. It don't get the job done. And it didn't with me. I wanted something to go right on down there and get it, and not have to mess around all night with it. Now, that's how I wanted it, and if we want something bad enough, that's how we're going to get it. And that's what I got. I started back later, and you know what I'm talking about. I don't have to tell you. But in that point in my life, it seemed like everybody, I don't know if you've been through this or not, you probably have. But at one point there, it seemed like everybody that I knew and some that I didn't know was concerned about my drinking. They were all minding my business. The boss would say, you drink too much. Why don't you quit? And I'd get mad and go home. And my wife would have said, why don't you quit? And I'd get mad at her and go to my mother's. And she'd say, why don't you quit? And I'd go to one of the bars and they wouldn't even sell me a drink. And I had the money. Now, that's a real insult when they won't sell it to you if you've got the money. I even went into a public restroom one time, and a guy that I'd never seen before in my life said, man, you need to get off this booze. You're in bad shape. So to satisfy them, I just decided I'd quit. One Monday morning, I said, I'll quit. Now, I'd been, for 8 years now, been about drunk the whole time. I don't mean I was falling down drunk for 8 years. I just never did run out of gas. I just had enough to keep going. There was never a day past that I didn't have a considerable amount of alcohol in me, but I wasn't falling down drunk every day. But I'd been 8 years, I'd been doing what I had to do every day to keep going. And so those of you who have quit before know it's a little more to it than just quitting on Monday morning like that. Another reason I quit, I didn't have any liquor. That's a good reason to quit. But as Monday grew longer, I grew shakier. And when my wife got home from work that evening, I was vibrating. I wasn't shaking anymore. And I asked her to call this doctor that I'd insulted a few weeks before, and she wouldn't do it. But she dialed the phone, and I apologized for the first time in my life to somebody. And it wasn't because I wanted to apologize to him either. It was because I needed him for something. I never did apologize to anybody until I came to Alcoholics Anonymous unless I needed something. But I apologized to him, and I said, if you'll come over tonight right away, I'll need some help. And he came over and gave me a shot that night, and the next day he carried me out to the funny farm to dry out. Now, we could get into some long, drawn-out details about my drying out periods and times. We won't get into that. I'll make a long story short. I went to every place that was open in North Carolina prior to 1960. And I went to some of them 2 or 3 times. As long as anybody would get me sober, I got drunk again. And you know, nobody could tell me about the illness of alcoholism. Nobody, because I wouldn't listen to them. I would not identify in any way with anybody who was an alcoholic. I was just having problems with my drinking, and one day I was going to get it straightened out. One day when these problems went away, one day when they went away, I would be able to drink and everything was going to be all right. But you know, it didn't happen that way because I was addicted to alcohol. I was addicted to alcohol, and I found myself doing things that I said I'd never do. I found myself in places that I said I'd never go. And I would ask myself this question. I said, what are you doing here? What are you doing in this place? And I couldn't answer why. But the amazing thing is I found myself back the next night at the same place. And the next time it wasn't nearly as bad as it was the first time. I found myself with people whom I said I'd never associate with. And I said, what am I doing with these people? And I couldn't answer it. But I'd find myself back the next night with the same people. And I liked it a little bit better. This is alcoholism as I know it. We find ourselves doing things that we'd never do under ordinary circumstances. We find ourselves sacrificing principles that we were taught as a child. I was taught principles when I was a young man, and I started sacrificing these principles in my life. I started compromising, well, not being so honest, you know, or not being so sincere. I started compromising, and when you compromise one, it's easy to compromise many principles, and soon I found myself with no principles to live by. And that's a terrible existence. When a person has no principles to live by, then he has nothing to live for. And that's where I found myself. I used to say that I didn't have an opportunity, but I did. I didn't take advantage of the opportunities that I had. I took advantage of the people who offered me the opportunities. This was my way of life, and I paid the price for it. I'm not going to tell you how my thinking was, and I'm not going through all of that. I will tell you about one of my visits to a local institution. Everybody calls it Dix Hill until they've been there at least once. Then they call it State Hospital or something like that. It sounds a little more refined. But in case you don't know, it's an asylum. And it was right where I needed to be, but I didn't think so. And after I had been dried out in this asylum, after I had gone through convulsions and DTs, convulsions never bothered me too much. I never did see myself have one of them until I saw somebody else have one time. I said, hell, you mean I had one of those things? But I went through all this, and after I started thinking, my head come on straight, I started resenting. The first clear thought in my mind was resenting the people that sent me there. I don't have any business being here. I had abused alcohol and I'd abused drugs. I'm also a drug addict in addition to my alcoholism. I don't talk much about my drugs because this is a program about alcohol. But I had abused both of these substances in my life. And that's why I was there. And at that time they had a medicine called anti-abuse. And if you'd agreed to take anti-abuse, they'd let you out in 2 weeks. And I agreed to take anti-abuse. There was only one thing wrong. I was playing games with the psychiatrist and the group therapist and the psychologist there. They'd ask me a question and I'd give them an exactly opposite answer from what they wanted to hear. And they would sit there and stare at me for a few minutes. And then they'd ask me another question and I'd give them some crazy answer. And they'd look at me again in amazement. And then I'd go out and sit in the hall the rest of the day gloating how I'd screwed up everybody there. And the next day we'd go through it again. And so when the anti-abuse call came and I said, yes, I'll take it, I raised my hand higher than anybody there. And they said, no, we don't feel like you're a fit subject for that. The next week, they had another anti-abuse call, and I raised my hand. But things hadn't changed. I was still being smart. And they said, no. I said, well, that's all right. I'll be gone next week. My 30 days are up, and I'm going. So when my time was up, I had my bags packed, and they said, where are you going, Bivins? I said, I'm going home. This is my last day here. They said, you think it's your last day here. They showed me some papers that they had, and it seemed like they'd made a mistake. I was there on an indefinite commitment. They could have kept me there as long as necessary. My discharge was contingent upon approval by the entire staff there. And you know what I'd been doing to them. Then it was a time for another talk with myself. I said, Self, you got to say something they want to hear, don't you? Going to be here a while. But you know, this so much describes the alcoholic. This so much described me. I didn't want to live in a real world. I wanted to live in fantasy all the time. I never wanted to face reality. I never wanted any of the problems that anybody else had, and that's why I was in the condition that I was in. But after I had this talk with myself, I said, Self, you can be here a little while, you know that. Talking like you're talking, so I suggest that you go in and tell these people about it. So the next day I went in and I told them, I said, I've been pulling your leg. They said, we know, we're glad you know about it. I started talking different. I started telling them things they wanted to hear. I didn't mean it from my heart, but I started telling me some things they wanted to hear, and in short order, I was discharged. Makes cold chills run over me sometimes now because that was 20-some years ago. I could still be in that nut house. Because there are people over there that are talking like that. I go over there once in a while to take a program, and they're still over there talking like that, and they've been there a long time, too. But I was discharged from this asylum, and I came home, and my wife had met some people in Alcoholics Anonymous. And she wanted me to be like these people. And she called them, and they came to see me, and I said, yes, I'll go. I always said yes. I'll do this or I'll do that when it would please somebody else. I wasn't going for me. I was going for her. And they tell me, you get what you're coming for. If you're coming for your wife, if you're coming for a job, you'll get a job. I was coming for her. She got better. I didn't. She did. I was coming to Alcoholics Anonymous to learn how to drink and not be sick. And I felt certain that maybe they could do something to help me. But I went to that first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, and they started talking about sobriety. And I almost threw up. Sobriety. One fella had been sober 3.5 months, and I knew he was the biggest drunk I'd ever seen in my life. And he said, I hope I stay sober the rest of my life. And I thought I'd die right there. They were nice to me. They made an impression on me. They were so nice to me, I started looking for excuses that first night to get out, and it really did take me 4 meetings to get away from Alcoholics Anonymous. The people were so nice to me. I started looking around, and I saw some bald heads like buds, and I said, I was 25 and a half years old at that time, and I said, I'm not old enough to be an alcoholic. I looked around, and there was a fellow there that I'd known all my life. At one time, he was a real sharp man. I mean, he had a mind that wouldn't quit. But alcohol had dulled him just a little bit. And I said, that man's got brain damage, and I haven't got any. So I can't be an alcoholic. I'm not like him. There were even some winos there. And I said, I certainly am not a wino. Certainly am not a wino. I have never been down on the other side of the tracks drinking that stuff with them. And it wasn't until I was down on the other side of the tracks drinking that stuff that I knew that I was in the right place to begin with. I just didn't want to admit it. I started making all the excuses to get out of Alcoholics Anonymous, and you were patient and you told me. You said, Bryant, if these things haven't happened to you yet that have happened to us, keep drinking and they will. But you don't have to do it. You don't have to go any farther down. The illness and the progression of the illness of alcoholism was explained to me explicitly. It was explained to me. I was given the message by people who had a message. And they told me they loved me. And they told me they didn't want to see me go down that far. And I left. I left Alcoholics Anonymous to prove you were not telling me the truth. And you didn't quite tell me the truth. You didn't tell me it was as bad as it was going to be. But over the next 6 years, it happened. It happened. Everything that I'd worked for in my life was gone. Every principle that I was taught was gone. At one time in my community, I was a respected businessman. I was a civic leader. I was active in church. I mean by active, I mean go around in circles like everybody that's active in church does. I had the respect of the people in my community. And all of these things seemed to disintegrate right in front of my eyes, and there seemed nothing that I could do about it. I was unwilling to listen to anyone. Unwilling to listen to anyone. I bargained with God from time to time when I'd get in desperate situations. I'd say, God, if you do this for me, I'll do that for you. And amazing enough, I don't think God heard that transaction, but He helped me anyhow. I'm glad He didn't hold me to what I said I'd do for Him back then. But nevertheless, I'll get on with it. This is the end of the drinking, I hope and pray that it is. It was Christmas of 1960. And I was on Skid Row in my hometown. Something that I'm not proud of. I'm not proud of it, but neither am I ashamed of it, because this is what it took to bring me to my knees. And you taught me that anything that brings me to my knees is good. I was as sick as a man could possibly be. I had a pint of vodka, and I drank this pint of vodka, and the more I drank, the sicker I got. And I didn't feel like I could hold another drop. And I didn't feel like I could stand another bit of pressure on the inside of me. Something had me wrapped up. Something was choking me to death. I had cirrhosis of the liver. My ankles were that big. My eyes were yellow. And I didn't care really whether I lived or died up until that point. Until there was a realization that I was going to die. And when you have a realization that you're going to die, you don't want to die, and I didn't. And in my moments of despair, I fell to my knees on a flophouse floor on Skid Row in Durham, North Carolina, and I said, God, I've gone as far as I can go. I don't want any more of this life, and if you'll do it one more time, I'll try my best to do all I can. That was Christmas Day of 1960, and by God's grace, I haven't had a drink since then. I don't mean that I got well right away. No. You see, I'd been Mr. Big Shot. I'd been going to these drying-out places that would give you a shot every 4 hours. Or they'd give you a drink every 3 or 4 hours and said, it's going to be all right. We're going to make it easy for you. Or they'd give you a handful of pills or a glass of formaldehyde, and they made it easy for me. They made getting sober easy for me. And the easier they made it, the sooner I got back to get drunk. And today, I don't know, I believe sometimes we're making it easier or too easy. Because this time I hurt. This time I hurt. And I want to tell you, you can hurt as bad as anybody else and still get well. That didn't hurt me a bit. The hurting that I did, I was reminded of it again this morning when I got up. How much I hurt. And it didn't hurt me a bit because as long as I remember that, I haven't repeated my performance. I went to a non-medical place, of all places. There was no charge, and that was all I could afford. The name of the place was Damascus Home. Remember that. It'll come back up in a few minutes. But they didn't believe in medication, and I sobered up on pink aspirin tablet and dilantin sodium. And I got as sober as I ever did anywhere else. And as old boy says back home, it took that time. I'll tell you the condition of body and mind that I was in. I couldn't fill out an application because I couldn't remember my mother's name and address. After 12 days, I had my first clear thought. The guys sat on top of me. They led me to the bathroom. They fed me juice and they fed me raw eggs until I was able to walk myself. And I woke after the 12th day, and I had a clear thought. Heretofore, my first thought would be, I've got to get out and make a bundle of money and get things straight. Or I've got to get my wife back. Or I've got to do other things came first, but this time, the thing that came first in my life was I remembered how sick I'd been. I remembered that. And I hope to God I never forget it. Because I feel like a man that forgets the past is doomed to repeat it. And I don't want to repeat that past again. I remembered the people in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I said, those people were staying sober. Those people wanted to give me something and I didn't want to receive it. And I'm going back to Alcoholics Anonymous. And if you're here tonight and you're coming back, God, keep coming back, because that's the name of the game. is keep coming back. That's... I'd hate to see how many people were here tonight if we had to depend on the ones that made it right from the word go. There wouldn't be many of us here. But I came back to Alcoholics Anonymous, and I was looking for something that time. I was looking for something, and I found something that very first night. Didn't find the whole thing, 12 steps and all these friends, but I found something to build from. I found hope. It's something that I hadn't had all of my life, and that was hope. I heard you people talk about how you had recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of body and mind. I heard you describing some of my feelings and some of the symptoms of how I felt, and I listened closely. I listened closely to an old boy that said he was waking up in the middle of the night after he first got sober, wringing wet, perspiration, afraid, and not knowing what he was afraid of or what the score was. And I listened close to him because I was expecting to feel that way the same night. And I said, well, what do you do about it? What do you do about it? He said, you do the best you can. I'm glad he didn't tell me to take 2 Libriums or 2 chloral hydrates or something like that, because I'd have took them. I'd have took them. He said, you do the best you can. Sometimes you have to get up and walk. And he said, sometimes you just get up and stay all night. He said, sometimes you get up and smoke cigarettes if you smoke, or drink coffee if you drink coffee. But you do what you have to do. And I said, what happens? He said, they get farther apart. You don't have them as often. He said, it's been a pretty good while since I've had a spell like that. And what he told me was true. I had some of these feelings, and they did get farther apart. And I listened that night, and I knew that I was home. I knew that I belonged finally somewhere. I knew that I belonged. But you know, my alcoholic traits and my alcoholic thinking, I think that one of the problems with us today is lack of gratitude. And I think that our forgetters are working pretty good. Mine did. My forgetter worked real good because I forgot. You know, I forgot that God was doing for me what I couldn't do for myself. You know, I left him back there at Skid Row. I didn't need him anymore then. And I was back in this group, and I was leaning on them, and they were telling me. And I'll never forget what a lady told me that first night, and I hope I never forget it. And I hope I never forget to apply what she told me to do. She stopped me at that door as I headed out. I headed out with some hope. And she said she was the prettiest lady I've ever seen in my life. And she said, honey, we were real glad to have you tonight. And we want you to come back. We need you. And that was a big switch in my life. That was a tremendous switch because nobody needed me. I felt like because my set speech was, who needs them? I didn't need them, so why did they need me? So it was different. They needed me, she said. And she fixed me a cup of coffee. I said, I can't stay because I'm with these other guys. She said, they'll wait for you. And she stopped me that night and she fixed this coffee for me. And she told me a little bit about this program of Alcoholics Anonymous. She said, you're carrying a bunch of junk around with you. And we don't work it like that in Alcoholics Anonymous. She said, we remember what made us sick. We remember how sick we were. We remember the people that we've harmed.
and we start a day at a time, doing the best that we possibly can. And then when we do well enough, we make amends to these people. And when you do the best you can every day, that's all that God or anybody else can expect of you. And if you start right now doing the best you can, you'll be all right. And the only bad days that I've had since then were the days that I didn't do the best I could. I got into Alcoholics Anonymous, and I started going to the meetings, and I hear this so much, and people say, I'm getting sick of hearing this. Some of us are sicker than others, and I don't get sick of hearing it because I was one of those that was sicker than others. My mind was scrambled around a little bit, and I couldn't retain what was said at the meetings. And I felt like that I was one of the ones that were fortunate if I got to the door. I'd sit there and listen to a speaker, and I said, man, he was great. And I'd leave the club room, and I said, what did he say? I couldn't remember what he said. But the thing that attracted me most of all was the people in this fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, and the love and the patience and the kindness that you showed to me. And I'm so grateful tonight that there were some people who practiced the principles of this program, because they eventually showed me the answer in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, I did all the things that I wasn't supposed to do, and I stayed sober for a while. You know, I did all the things that the book tells us. The people in my group had made the mistakes. I didn't pick out a sponsor, and nobody wanted to sponsor me, so I was just sort of hanging loose there for a while. They didn't know what to do with me. I was back like I was when I was a kid. I didn't fit. I didn't want to drink liquor, so I didn't fit with the flip-flops that were getting drunk every other week. And I didn't fit with those who were trying to work the program because I wasn't working the program. So the group felt like I needed some leadership, and they assigned me a sponsor. And that's a hard way to get one, baby. If I would have chosen a sponsor at that time in Alcoholics Anonymous, I will assure you he would have been the last one. He was everything that I didn't want to be. He was loud, he was profane, he was everything. He'd been sober 14 and a half years too. So he had to have something going for him, and he called me behind the podium one night after the meeting, and he said, I don't like this any better than you do, but they've asked me to be your sponsor. And all I could say was, oh. He said, you've been coming to our meetings, and you've been eating our cake and drinking our coffee. You've been listening to our speakers. But none of them sink through. And you don't even wash your coffee cup. And you don't empty your ashtray. So you start doing something tonight. And I started washing cups that night. And I've washed them ever since. I hated to see styrofoam cups come out because that was something I couldn't do. And he said, I want to talk with you later about the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. I think you ought to get involved in it. And I didn't know what he was talking about. I'd been coming to every meeting. They told me to come to all the meetings and to go to some out-of-town meetings. So we had a meeting place there. Every night we didn't have a meeting, we'd meet there, and some of us who were going by out of town would stop by and pick up the guys that didn't have a car. So I went to that place every night. I even went with a guy to work one night. I thought he was going out of town to a meeting. But you know, We can go through the motions of doing things right. But eventually something has to be done right. And my sponsor told me one day, he said, look, boy, he said, you've been coming to these meetings on Tuesday night, these discussion meetings, and you talk real pretty. But I know what you're doing. You're parroting somebody else. You've heard somebody else say it, and because it sounds good, you say it too. You're just one of them Me Too boys, like Burton Crawford used to say, Me Too. And you quote somebody else, but you say a lot of pretty things, but we see you after that Tuesday night meeting. We see you on Wednesday night down the street. And he said, you ain't walking like you talk. He said, poker games. He said, where does that, I want to look in that book and find out where the principles of Alcoholics Anonymous says it's all right to play poker. I want to see where it's all right for you to be with some of that riffraff that you was with the other night I saw you with. And you know, I was coming to AA, but I felt like I'd heard somebody say one time that you had to have a little something different. You had to spice your AA life up. And I was doing that, and he thought it was wrong. And it was. It was. If you're here tonight and you hear some of these guys coming through and they're talking pretty, and they said, use this AA like a cafeteria. I listen to them too. Just take what you want and leave the rest of it, I heard them say. And so I took the easy part, like coming to the meetings and listening to the speakers, and the rest of it was still laying over there. I took the easy part. So don't listen to the one that says it's a cafeteria. I listened to those that said there are no musts in AA. And they were lying too. Because my book of Alcoholics Anonymous tells me that there's a whole lot of must that I got to do. I was listening to them. I was listening to the guy that says the one that got up the earliest this morning has been sober the longest. I don't believe that either. He's been just as dry as I have today, but he ain't been sober as long as I have. He's drunk yesterday. Ain't no way he can be sober. I listened to these yo-yos, and it didn't get me anywhere. And when my sponsor confronted me with some facts, I said, by God, it's easy for you to stay sober. You got your family. And I see you're happy, and it's easy for you to stay sober, and I can't stay sober unless I get my family back. He said, the book don't say that. And that's the first time I read the book of Alcoholics Anonymous to prove him out of line. But it's in there. It says wife or no wife. That my sobriety was not dependent upon people. My sobriety was dependent upon my willingness to trust in God and clean house. And I wasn't doing either. I wasn't doing either one. You see, I left God, like I said. I left him back there. I used him sort of like a garbage man. Come by and pick it up. I got it ready for you. You know, I can laugh about it now, and I believe God's laughing about it too, because he knows I had a lot of, well, as Franklin says, I was about a quart low anyhow. I went right up here. And I believe he's smiling about it too. I was like this old boy. I thought my faith was getting better, but this old boy back home was climbing a mountain one day, and he climbed for a long time. And it was getting dark, and he said, God, I've got to see how far down I've got to go. I'll never get back. And so he reached over to look down, and when he did, he fell off the mountain. And there was a little old brush scrub tree there, and he grabbed onto that, and he held onto it for dear life. And it was getting dark, and he couldn't see how far down it was, and he couldn't see how far up he had to go, so he was just hanging there. And he started hollering. He said, is there anybody down there to help me? And didn't anybody say anything? And he hollered again and said, is anybody down there to help me? Nobody said anything. He said, is it anybody up there that can help me? And a voice said, yes, I can help you. And he said, who is it? He said, this is the Lord. He said, well, the Lord help me. He said, son, I can help you if you've got faith. He said, Lord, I've got faith. Don't worry about that. I have got faith. That's something you don't have to worry about. The Lord said, all right, if you've got faith, I want you to let go of that tree and drop down. The guy hung there for a few minutes. He said, is it anybody else up there? I guess I was about like that because, you know, God done helped me out of that jam I was in, and they won't much of a jam anymore, just little crisis things, you know. And I kept bugging my sponsor about these things, and he kept saying no. I said, can I go see my wife? He said, no. Finally, he told me, I said, go see her then. Go see her. I went Christmas, and he carried me over that Christmas to carry some presents to my little girl. I was going over to buy her love back. And, I'd open up some charge account like a good old drunk will do and borrowed some money, and I'd bought a lot of gifts, and I was going to carry over and buy her love. And he carried me over there, and my little girl said, I don't want them. She said, I don't want to see you. And I don't really care whether you come back or not. And I left there that night crying. My sponsor said, come on, let's go back home. We went back, and I finally went back after sober 18 months, and I told my wife. I said, he told me that it'd be all right to go see her. And he said, tell her just like it is. And whatever she says, call me back. And I told her I'd been sober 18 months. She said, I know it. I haven't seen your name in the paper. And I told her that I was a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. And she said, I'm glad. I understand it's a fine organization. And I told her that I had a lot of friends. And she said, good. You didn't have any when you left. And finally she said, if you stay sober the rest of your life, and I hope you do, I have no intentions of ever living with you again. I called my sponsor and I said, told him exactly what she said, and he said, come on back, you'll get another one. That's all he said. And I did. I found her in Alcoholics Anonymous. And he went with us to be married so that his prophecy would be fulfilled, I think. Nevertheless, I came back. I was still coming to the meetings. I was doing everything that I could. But on the inside of me, I was hurting. And I didn't know what was wrong. When you're like that, AA doesn't really mean a whole lot, and it didn't mean a whole lot to me then. And finally, one of our older members told me, he said, son, I want you to get that book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I want you to read it as it applies to you. And I want you to apply it in your life and try it for 6 more months. He said, it ain't long. Try working this program the way the book says for 6 more months. And he said, you'll find your answer. I started reading the book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I read about me right from the beginning. Dr. Silkworth had me tabbed right there in the doctor's opinion. That's as far as I had to go. When he said men and women drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol. And even though we admit that it's harmful to us, that our alcoholic way seems the only life. And when we do without alcohol for a length of time, we get irritable, restless, and discontented until we can again experience that sensation that comes by taking a few drinks. I read that, and that was me because I was restless, irritable, and discontented. I read on, and it said, unless a complete psychic change occurs in the alcoholic's life, unless it occurs, there is little hope of his recovery. Little hope of his recovery. And a complete psychic change had not occurred in my life. And I read on in that book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I read about me, and I got to the chapter of the agnostics, and I felt so low. I felt so low. You can't imagine. And I look back to that day at Christmas, and I said, God did so much for me, and I've done so little for him. And I fell to my knees again. And I said, God, I'm going to stay here. And one day I'll come up a free man. And I did. God relieved me from the obsession to drink alcohol. He released me from bondage of myself, which was my problem. And today he gave me back my original problem that it's been all along, and that's lack of power. I don't have the power. I didn't have the power to begin with. That's why I turned to alcohol. I didn't have the power to stay sober and be happy in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I turned to him. And he told me in these words, and I understand in the day, that this will always be my problem, is lack of power. But he provides that power in my life. He provides it for me, and he expects me to carry out his will. He expects me to take this power and do something constructive with it. He expects me to utilize this power that he gives me. And you know, ever since that day, life has took on new meaning for me. And I want to tell you about it. If you're here tonight and you're doubting that, you keep going to your knees every night, and one of these days you're going to come up a free man. I left home yesterday morning, and there was a guy in our detoxification, and he was shaking, and he said, if you don't do something for me, I'm going to die. I said, I can do all I can for you, and you still might die. But I want you to introduce you to somebody that can make it right for you. And if you're supposed to get well, you'll get well. And he said, who's that? I said, get on your knees. We're going to meet God this morning. And, you know, we prayed for the obsession to be lifted from him. And we prayed for God to make it as easy as he possibly could for him. We got up and I came down here. I called this afternoon to see if God was doing his job with Will. He's better. God's still at work. But if you're here today and there's some doubt in your mind, try it. Try it, because I've had a feeling of well-being ever since then. And it's a feeling that I wanted to have. It's a feeling that alcohol almost gave me, a feeling of well-being. And I have that feeling today. And, you know, I'm running out of time, but there's some miracles that's happened as a result of this program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I'm going to tell you about them. It's going to take about 5 minutes. And if you want to leave, that's all right, but I'm going to stay here and tell you about it. The greatest miracle was that I doubted everything you told me. And when I quit doubting, things started working for me in my life. Just the idea of me stop doubting anything is a miracle in itself. Okay, you told me to be patient with that little girl that said she never wanted to see me again. And I was impatiently patient with her. I wanted her, I loved her as much as I was capable of loving anybody. And eventually she started coming around. And the relationship was a little bit better and a little bit better. And finally she graduated from high school. This is a long time, mind you. She hadn't even started to school when we did that. And when she graduated from high school, I told her she graduated with honors. She had a scholarship, and I was real proud of her, and I told her, I said, honey, in spite of me, I'm real proud of you. And her words were, Daddy, I don't want you to sell yourself short. If I had to choose to be like anybody in the world, I'd want to be like you. You know, money can't buy that. Money can't buy that. But it was given to me. It was given to me by the grace of God. You see, that at one time in my life, that was a despair. That was a low spot in my life. That was a valley. But you told me that if I had enough faith, you told me that if I had enough faith and enough patience, that God would make something beautiful out of it, and He did. You know, my wife there, she was pretty insulting to me, and you said, you don't have to be insulting back. You don't have to be insulting back. And I wasn't. I would say yes and no and thank you and I appreciate this. And today she respects me. We're not married anymore, you know, but she respects me today. That's something that she never did in her life. And we're friends. And I wouldn't take anything in the world for it. Is my friendship with her. You told me to be patient. You told me to be kind, and it would pay off. And it did. I never will forget when I went to Damascus Home. It was a rehab farm out in the country, and I wasn't accustomed to that. And I remember walking those grounds, and I remember crying. And that god-awful loneliness that possessed me. And I remember those tears too. 12 years ago, I went back to Damascus Home as superintendent of the same home I'd been a patient at. Because this program was working in my life. And you told me that if I had a message to transmit, if I could give this message, if I had it, then I could give it. And after I got it, I was able to give it away. And I walked those... And I walked those grounds of Damascus Home and I cried again because I knew that God was still at work in my life. I knew that He was at work. One reason I felt uneasy about this judge, there was another judge in my life that carried me to the ball games and he helped raise me from the time I was a little boy. He introduced me to my first wife. He sponsored me in a civic club. And then I started coming before him for various charges. He kept it undercover for a while, and then they were so numerous and so often that he couldn't keep them undercover anymore. And finally, I stood before this judge, and with tears in his eyes, he gave me an active sentence. And he wasn't the only one that had tears in his eyes either. I did too. And I served that active sentence, and I resented every day of it, and I hated him for within everything that was within me. I hated him. And you told me that I couldn't live with hate in my heart. You told me that resentment was the number one offender, and I had to get rid of it, and you told me the only way I could get rid of it was to go to him and make things right. And I went to him, and I told him, I said, Judge, I've been sober now for about 2 years. I found the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, and it's offered me a new way of life, and part of my way of life is to tell you that I love you in spite of what you did, and I know that you had a job to do, and if that's what it took, then I'm grateful for it. And the judge and I, we cried a little bit again, but I knew that everything was all right with him, and later on, he called me back into the same courtroom that he sentenced me in, and there were some guys sitting on the front row there. They didn't look good. They didn't smell good and they didn't feel good because they'd been in the drunk tank all night. And he had them to stand up and he said, "Gentlemen, at one time this man was in the same condition that you're in. And today he's one of our most respected and beloved citizens. And if you would like to be released in his custody and try to find what he's got, I'll allow this to be done." You know, two of those men hadn't had a drink since then. But I stood there and I cried again that day because I knew that everything was all right between the judge and I. I knew that God was still at work. There was a preacher in my hometown that loved me, and he prayed for me. And one time I was about drunk and I had some wine in my pocket. And we were on our knees praying, and when we got up, that wine neck bottle was sticking out of my vent of my coat. And he saw it. And he said, "I've never seen anybody like you in my life." And I walked down the streets that night because I respected him as much as I did anybody in the world. And I cried great big tears. But you know, after this program of Alcoholics Anonymous started working in my life, he had me to speak in his church one Sunday morning. And he introduced me as a miracle. And he said that he loved me. And he introduced me as his brother. And I stood there and I cried again in that pulpit because I knew that God was still at work through the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. I knew that. He's still at work today. And another resentment that I had in my life, I'm going to tell you about this because it's something else. I had a resentment towards my daddy, and I never did get rid of it until you told me that I needed to get rid of it. And I said, "How come? He ain't here. I hadn't seen him in 20 years and don't know where he is." They said, "Well, pray for him. Pray for him." And I started praying for my daddy. It wasn't much. It was God bless him to start with, and then I could say God bless him and mean it. And then I said, "God bless him and take care of him wherever he is." Got word that my daddy was dead down in South Carolina, and my sister and I went to the funeral, and we got there an hour before the service, and we went in to see my daddy. And instead of the traditional handkerchief in his pocket, he had a Serenity prayer pen. My dad had been sober 3 months when he died. I didn't have anything to do with it, but those resentments could have killed me if I'd have lived with them or tried to live with them. But you see, my sister, her name's Bivins, and anybody in our family that ever took a drink becomes an alcoholic. There's something that just runs in the family, more so than looks. But my sister was there, and she was amazed at the life that my wife and I were living. And she said, "There's been so much change in you." And my sister took a drink. In February, it was a year ago, my sister called me from Orlando, Florida, and she said, "I've got the same problem that you have." She didn't say that she wanted to get sober. She said, "I want to be like you and Marion." My sister's a member of the Orlando group of Alcoholics Anonymous. And it's beautiful. I was down to visit her we went to some meetings together. You know, we never had been close until then. Today, we're just as close as we can possibly be. I'm as close to her as I am some of you. You know, my family, I love them, but I'm not nearly as close to them as I am the members of Alcoholics Anonymous, because you understand me and they don't. I met my wife in Alcoholics Anonymous, and we share this program together. She keeps me under surveillance. And we discuss our problems, and we share this program, and it's a beautiful life. We've had some tough times. We get along as well as any two that's going through the change of life at the same time. But she's been a tremendous help and a guiding force in my life of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I'm real grateful for her. But all of this wouldn't have been possible. All of you wouldn't be possible without this power that's been my problem all along. Without God giving us strength and guidance and showing each other the way, we wouldn't have it today. So when I tell you that I love you for more than one reason. I love you because when I was unlovable and when I was not capable of loving, you showed me how to do it. You showed me how to do it because you knew how to do it. God had given it to you. And I wanted to be like you. I wanted what you had. And I said, someday I'm going to have it. And then when I found out what I had, it was the love of God. And you'd had it all along. And the book of Alcoholics Anonymous told me all along that deep down within every man, woman, and child is a basic fundamental of God. It takes a cleaning out. And it takes some of it is covered up with a lot of stuff. And we have to clean it out. But deep down, you brought some goodness back into my life, and I'll be eternally grateful for you and God and this fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. God bless.
Bryant, thank you very much for this tremendous message and the thoughts and your experiences and hope and strength that you've shared with us. I can't improve on that. We're very grateful to you for coming all the way from North Carolina to hear us. Do you have announcements, Joe, before we close?
No, I don't think so. Just one. There will be some speaking from the chairs. We run over a little bit. I'm sure everybody feels like it's worth every damn minute of it.